A young woman, lost and out of place, accidentally boarded the wrong subway and ended up in a wealthy part of the city, where she helped a man who was later revealed to be a millionaire in disguise. You're not telling the truth. You have nowhere to go, do you? The officer's tone was harsh, his gaze intense with doubt. Celine stood still on the flawless pavement, her hands shaking as she held onto the straps of her worn-out backpack. I just got lost, she stuttered, her voice barely audible. I'm trying to find my way back home, she added. Home? The officer sneered, eyeing her untidy appearance. No identification, no address, no contacts. You're lying. You have no place to return to, do you? Tears threatened to spill from Celine's eyes, but she fought them back. She had endured far worse than this. At 22, she had mastered the art of concealing her pain, hiding her weaknesses. Raised in foster care, she had been moved from one home to the next, never truly feeling at home. Now, working late shifts at a rundown diner in the city's toughest area, she barely earned enough to cover rent for her shabby apartment. That morning, after a taxing double shift, Celine had gotten on the subway, intending to return home and rest. She had fallen asleep, only to wake up in an unfamiliar, affluent neighborhood. The streets were spotless, the buildings towering and pristine. She had never witnessed such wealth up close. With no money left on her Metro card and her phone out of charge, Celine began walking, hoping to spot something familiar or find a subway station. As she walked, she noticed an elderly man collapse on the sidewalk ahead. A crowd of well-dressed pedestrians passed by, some throwing fleeting glances, but none stopped. Without a second thought, Celine rushed over to the man. "Sir, can you hear me?" she asked, gently shaking his shoulder. He didn't respond. She checked for a pulse. It was faint, but there. A small pool of blood had started to gather beneath his head. "Someone call an ambulance!" she shouted, looking around. People kept walking, avoiding her gaze. Annoyed, Celine took out her phone, only to realize it was dead. She spotted a nearby cafe and dashed inside. "Please, I need to use your phone," she begged. "A man has collapsed outside," she implored. The barista hesitated, but handed her the phone. Celine quickly dialed the emergency services, giving them the location and details. She returned to the man, pressing her scarf gently to the wound on his head. "Help is coming," she whispered. Moments later, an ambulance arrived, along with 2 police officers. While the paramedics attended to the man, one officer approached Celine. "Did you see what happened?" he asked. "I found him like this and called for help," she explained. The officer looked at her suspiciously. "Do you have any ID?" Celine shook her head. "I lost my wallet." "What's your name?" "Celine." "Celine what?" "Just Celine." The officer's expression stiffened. "You're lying. You have no home to return to, do you?" Before Celine could reply, the man groaned on the stretcher. He was regaining consciousness. "Sir, can you hear me?" a paramedic asked. The man nodded weakly. "The girl, she helped me." The officer turned to Celine, his tone shifting slightly. "Is that true?" Celine nodded. The elderly man looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you, dear." As the paramedics prepared to move him, he reached for Celine's hand. "Please come with me. I want to thank you properly." Celine hesitated, glancing at the officer. "It's all right," the man reassured her. "I insist." Hesitant, Celine climbed into the ambulance and sat beside him as they headed to the hospital. After a comprehensive checkup, the doctors confirmed the man had a mild concussion, but he would fully recover. As he rested, he turned to Celine. "My name is Mr. Whitman." He introduced himself. "I live nearby. When I'm discharged, I'd like you to come to my house. It's the least I can do." Celine tried to object, but he waved it off. "Nonsense. You saved my life." 2 days later, Celine stood at the entrance of a grand mansion, its gates elaborate and imposing. She inhaled deeply and rang the doorbell. A butler opened the door and greeted her warmly. "Miss Celine, we've been expecting you." Inside, the mansion was even more magnificent than she had imagined. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, and priceless artworks decorated every room. Mr. Whitman greeted her in the sitting room. "Welcome, my dear. Please make yourself comfortable." Celine sat uneasily, feeling out of place amidst the lavish surroundings. "I've arranged for you to stay here for a while," Mr. Whitman said. "You need rest, and I insist." Overwhelmed, Celine nodded. "Thank you." As she settled into the guest room, Celine couldn't help but reflect on how surreal her life had become. Going from being accused of having no home to being welcomed into a mansion. It felt like a dream, but deep down, she knew this was just the start of a new chapter. One filled with uncertainty, hope, and maybe a chance at a better life. Celine stood silently at the edge of the grand hallway, her fingers twisting the frayed strap of her old canvas bag. The air smelled of polished wood and fresh flowers. Too clean, too sophisticated for someone like her. Her gaze followed the butler as he disappeared behind ornate double doors, leaving her alone in a space too vast for silence. A voice broke through the stillness. "So, you're the girl who just happened to be there when my grandfather collapsed." Celine turned slowly. A tall man in a sharp navy suit stood in the doorway, his arms folded in expression unreadable. His features were defined, thick dark brows, a clean-shaven jaw, and a gaze that seemed to pierce right through her. "I'm Celine," she said, her voice cautious. "I was on the street when it happened. I helped." He took a step closer. "Helped or saw an opportunity?" "I didn't ask to come here," she insisted, her voice steady but firm. He narrowed his eyes, then turned and walked into another room. Moments later, muffled voices could be heard beyond the door. The words were unclear, but the tension was unmistakable. A minute passed before he returned, this time with the elderly man Celine had helped. "Celine," the old man smiled warmly. "This is my grandson, Daniel." She gave a small nod. Daniel barely acknowledged it. Later that evening, after a quiet dinner where Daniel barely spoke to her, Celine found herself in the guest bedroom, feeling like a stranger in a dream too luxurious for someone like her. She glanced at the plush comforter, the gold-trimmed curtains, and the faint ticking of the antique clock on the dresser. Everything in the room whispered of a world she didn't belong to. The next day, Mr. Whitman, cheerfully chatting despite his bandaged arm, asked Celine to stay a few more days to rest from the shock. She began helping around the house where she could. She noticed Maria, the housekeeper's young daughter, shyly peering at her book of English words. Celine offered to help, and by the end of the afternoon, they were both laughing over mispronounced idioms and silly poems. That evening, Daniel came home from a meeting and found Celine sitting at the long kitchen table, pointing at flashcards while Maria giggled beside her. He stood silently for a moment before speaking. "You seem to be getting very comfortable," he said coldly. Celine looked up, unfazed. "I'm just helping," she replied. Daniel nodded slowly, but said nothing further. He turned and walked away, his thoughts clouded with suspicion. He had already begun running a background check on her. He needed to know. No one just stumbled into their world without a reason. The results came in the next day. No parents, no college records, no criminal history. Just one emergency shelter registration from 3 years ago and a part-time job at a diner. That was it. She had nothing to hide because there was nothing to reveal. Daniel sat in his study, the report on his desk, untouched, with coffee beside him. She was exactly who she said she was, a girl who had nothing and no one. That evening, as he walked by the open sitting room door, he paused. Celine was folding clean towels with the housekeeper, smiling gently as she worked, her posture relaxed and her words kind. The others responded to her as if she had always been part of the household. Not like a stranger, but like someone who truly belonged. That night at dinner, Mr. Whitman laughed at something Celine said and placed a gentle hand on hers. Daniel noticed the gesture. His jaw clenched. Later, as they stood on the back patio, the sky fading to twilight, Daniel finally spoke. "You're very good with people." Celine glanced sideways at him. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" He cracked a faint smile, still unsure. She let out a small laugh, then looked down at her hands. "I know what you think, that I'm here for something. That I wanted grandfather's money or kindness, or whatever rich people think others want. Daniel didn't deny it. But I didn't ask to stay, she continued softly. And if you want me gone, I'll leave. Daniel paused for a moment, then spoke. He wants you here. That's enough for now. They stood in silence, the tension easing just enough to let the evening breeze in. Neither fully trusted the other, but something had started, though neither of them understood it yet. Forgiveness. Yet it felt like the first fracture in the barrier between two completely different worlds. The days spent at the Whitman estate moved slowly, and Celine began to feel as though she was simply drifting through a life that wasn't truly hers. She assisted whenever possible, teaching Maria English, helping with small tasks around the house, and spending time with Mr. Whitman. He was kind, and his quiet wisdom made her feel like she had found a safe place, even if it was only temporary. But Daniel's cold, scrutinizing gaze whenever he was near still unsettled her. One evening, while sitting with Mr. Whitman and listening to him talk about his past, Celine found herself opening up more than she had planned. The conversation shifted toward her past, and before she knew it, her voice quivered with memories long buried. I never really had a place, she began softly, her eyes distant as she looked out the garden. I was orphaned as a baby, grew up in an orphanage. The kids, they didn't care much about each other. I was always the last one picked for anything, even for games. I wasn't good enough for anyone, I guess. Mr. Whitman's face softened, and he reached out, patting her hand gently. That's a tough start, my dear. But you're not that girl anymore. She forced a small smile, but the sadness remained in her eyes. I used to think I was just nobody, like I didn't matter. I was always looking for someone to show me that I was worth something. But I've learned not to expect that from anyone. People only help when they want something in return. Her voice faltered as she continued. I've been lied to so many times. People say they care, but it's never true. Not really. You learn to shut down, to stop trusting. It's easier that way. Mr. Whitman looked at her with a quiet intensity, his voice gentle yet firm. You're not worthless, Celine. You're stronger than you think. The way you've handled everything in your life. Most would have given up by now, but not you. You have a special kind of strength. She felt a lump in her throat, but remained silent. She appreciated his words, but part of her wondered if they were just pity. She had always been good at distinguishing between kindness and charity. That night, Daniel came back late from a business trip. Celine was in the kitchen, helping Maria with her homework when she heard the front door open. A few moments later, Daniel staggered into the hallway, pale and disoriented, his eyes glazed. His steps were unsteady, and he looked like he didn't know where he was. Daniel, Celine said, her voice full of concern. Are you okay? He didn't answer right away, but collapsed against the wall, holding his head as though the weight of it was too much. Celine rushed to him, her heart pounding. She had never seen him like this. He seemed so vulnerable, so unlike the confident, cold man he normally was. Daniel, she said urgently, what's wrong? You're burning up. He mumbled something, but she couldn't make out the words. Celine quickly went to the kitchen, grabbed a damp towel, and returned to his side. She placed it gently on his forehead, but his temperature was alarmingly high. Panic rose in her chest. You need rest, she said softly, almost more to herself than to him. She helped him into a chair and covered him with the blanket she had grabbed from the couch. Moving quickly, she got water, medicine, and a bowl of soup from the kitchen. Despite his initial resistance, Daniel leaned back and allowed her to care for him. Celine felt the warmth of his skin to the towel and couldn't help but notice how much more human he seemed now, stripped of the arrogance and detachment he usually wore. She stayed by his side, keeping a watchful eye on him as he drifted in and out of sleep. As the night went on, Daniel's fever began to break, and Celine stayed with him, adjusting his blankets and wiping the sweat from his forehead. At some point during the night, exhaustion overtook her, and she found herself leaning against the edge of his bed. Her head slowly dropped, and before she knew it, she had fallen asleep, her cheek resting on the side of the mattress. By the early morning, Daniel's fever had broken, and he slowly regained consciousness. He blinked, the sunlight from the window hurting his tired eyes. He tried to sit up but froze when he saw her there, asleep beside him. Her hair was messy, and her hand was still near his pillow, but it was the sight of her that took him by surprise. Her kindness, her genuine care for him despite everything, made something inside him shift. He watched her for a moment, her steady breathing calming him in a way he hadn't expected. She wasn't like the people in his world, those who always wanted something from him. She was selfless. He hadn't realized how much that meant to him until now. As Celine stirred slightly, Daniel quickly sat up, not wanting to wake her, but his eyes remained on her. For the first time in a long while, his heart wasn't filled with bitterness or suspicion. There was something about her that felt real, something he hadn't felt in years. Later that morning, after Celine had woken up and checked on him, Daniel didn't say much. He was still processing the emotions running through him. But as he left for work, he did something unexpected. He quietly arranged for Celine to work at the local library, a place he knew had an opening. He didn't say it was for her benefit, but deep down, he knew it was the right thing to do. When he told her the news later, Celine was stunned. Why? Why are you doing this? Daniel's answer was simple. Because you deserve a chance, Celine. And for the first time in a long time, Celine felt like maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as invisible as she once thought. The morning light streamed through the wide kitchen windows, lighting up the marble countertops and gleaming silver fixtures. But beneath the graceful elegance, tension lingered. Celine walked into the kitchen just in time to overhear Ray's voices. I came in early because I have extra prep work, Clara snapped, folding her arms. You always act like you're the only one who cares, Sophia retorted, slamming a spoon into the sink. Stop trying to make me look bad in front of Mr. Daniel. I never said that. Stop, Celine interjected, her voice soft but firm as she stepped between the two women. They both turned to her, surprised. Can we take a breath first? They didn't speak, but the heated atmosphere began to ease slightly. I know things get tense, Celine continued, but both of you work harder than anyone I know. Maybe it's not about who did something wrong, but how we can stop hurting each other. There was a long silence. Clara was the first to look away. Sophia's shoulders dropped. Later that day, Clara approached Celine in the garden, wiping her hands on her apron. You handled that better than I ever could. You got something rare, Celine. Celine smiled shyly. I just know what it's like to feel invisible. That evening, Daniel came downstairs in a charcoal gray suit. Grandfather insists you accompany us to the gala tonight, he said, not meeting her gaze. It's a charity event. You're his special guest. I don't belong at places like that, Celine murmured. Daniel glanced at her, and for a brief moment, his expression softened. He's stubborn when he wants something, and he's rarely wrong. 2 hours later, Celine stood at the edge of the grand ballroom, dressed in a simple borrowed gown. Chandeliers overhead sparkled like stars, and laughter bounced off the marble floors. She kept her head down, feeling the weight of the stairs. Whispers followed her as she walked past. Is that the girl they found on the street? She doesn't seem like she belongs here. Maybe she's just a charity case. Celine's hand shook, her breath caught in her throat. Daniel was speaking with an investor nearby, but noticed a moment someone snickered. She probably doesn't even know which fork to use. He turned and walked directly to Celine, taking her hand. Listen closely, he said, his voice projecting clearly. No one has a right to decide someone's worth based on how they look, where they come from, or how much money they have. The room fell silent. She's not here because of pity, Daniel added. She's here because she deserves to be. Celine stared at him, stunned, unsure if her heart was racing from fear or something else entirely. But as the words settled and the crowd dispersed, a wave of emotion overwhelmed her. She excused herself and stepped out onto the terrace, where rain had begun to fall. She didn't realize she was crying until the cold raindrops mingled with her tears. Footsteps approached, and then a hand rested on her shoulder. No more. Daniel's voice was soft behind her. Why did you do that? She whispered. Now they'll hate you too. I don't care, he said simply. You don't understand. I've spent my whole life being reminded that I don't matter, that I don't belong. Daniel stepped in front of her, his eyes blazing with something fierce and unfamiliar. "You matter. You always have." And then, without hesitation, he pulled her into his arms. The rain fell harder, soaking their clothes, but neither of them moved. She clung to him like he was a lifeline, and he held her like he had waited years to find her. He lowered his head, and their lips met in a kiss, gentle, searching, real. It wasn't a fairy tale moment. There were no fireworks, no gasps from bystanders, just two broken people finding something whole in each other beneath the rain. "I never knew I was worth this much," she whispered against his chest. Daniel rested his chin on her head. "You're worth even more." Inside the ballroom, the party continued, but on the terrace, a new story had begun. The boardroom was filled with cold stares and tense silence. Daniel sat at the head of the long mahogany table, fingers steepled beneath his chin, as the chairman, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, spoke slowly and clearly. "We've received feedback from major investors," the chairman said, "and they're concerned that your public association with that girl, Celine, is affecting perception." "She's not just some girl," Daniel replied, his voice steady. "She's not from our world," another board member interjected. "We've worked too hard to maintain this company's reputation. If you continue to involve yourself with her, Daniel, the board has the right to vote on your removal as acting CEO." Daniel's jaw clenched. His world had always been cold, built on logic, legacy, and performance. He had never cared about their whispers, but now the cost was real. That night, he sat alone in his office, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. He stared at his phone, her contact glowing on the screen. He didn't call. The next morning, he found Celine in the library room of the estate, reading to the gardener's young son, both of them laughing quietly. She looked up when she saw him, smiled, and his chest tightened. But he said nothing about the board, the pressure, or the threats. Instead, he began to pull away. He stopped joining her for meals. He answered her questions with brief nods. He kept their conversation shallow. Routine, she noticed. Of course, she did. Celine didn't ask. She didn't beg or cry. She just began to shrink into herself again. One evening, she brought him tea and found him in his study, the lights dim, papers scattered on his desk. "I know I did something wrong," she said gently, "but I don't know what it is. And if you just tell me..." Daniel didn't meet her gaze. "You didn't do anything wrong, Celine. Then why does it feel like I'm a stranger again?" He stood abruptly and walked to a window. "Because that's what we are." Her breath caught. "What?" "I think it's time you left the estate." There it was, sharp as a knife, cold in the rain they once kissed under. Celine stared at him. "Is that what you want?" Daniel closed his eyes. He wanted to scream. No, but all he said was, "Yes." She didn't cry in front of him. She turned, walked quietly upstairs, and began to pack. She folded her few belongings with trembling hands. The sweater he had given her, the book she never finished, the scarf she wore the day they met. When she was done, she left a simple note on the bedside table. "I never wanted anything from you. Not your name, not your wealth. Just the peace I found when I was with you. Thank you for giving me that, even if it was only for a short time. Be happy, Daniel. Please." By the time Daniel returned to his room, she was already gone. He found the note, sat on the edge of the bed, and read it quietly. For the first time in years, Daniel Rowe, the man who never cried, never faltered, bent forward and allowed the silence to break him. In the quiet of the vast, lavish room where so much had been built and protected, a man finally realized what he had lost. Not a reputation, not a position, but the only thing that had ever made him feel truly alive. The bell above the library door chimed softly as Celine entered, a familiar scent of old books and ink wrapping around her. It felt like stepping into a quiet, forgotten part of her soul, a space untouched by heartbreak, pressure, or expectations. She hadn't come to hide, but to start anew. She organized the children's section, sorted the picture books, and reopened the free reading circle for children from a nearby shelter. Word spread fast. "Miss Celine is back." And every afternoon, the small room filled with little shoes, eager eyes, and stories that lifted spirits. She also volunteered to teach basic English and math to immigrant children on weekends. She had nothing to offer but time, patience, and the certainty that kindness could change lives. One afternoon, after a lesson, the head librarian called her aside. "There's a call for you," she said. "It's from the university. They said you applied for the Women's Community Scholarship." Celine's breath caught. "I didn't expect to." "You got it." Her knees buckled, and she sat down hard on the nearest chair, tears flooding her eyes. She had never seen herself as a scholar, but now the future wasn't something to fear. It was something to build. That night she wrote in her journal, "No one gets to decide my worth but me. Not where I come from, not how much I have, not who left me." Weeks passed. Celine began attending night classes, her days filled with work and study. Her name quietly spread among nonprofits and educators. Her story began circulating. A young woman once mistaken for a homeless, now teaching children and earning a degree against all odds. Then one morning, a well-known lifestyle magazine published a feature, "The Girl Who Took the Wrong Train and Ended Up Finding Herself." Daniel saw the headline by chance in a cafe near his office. He stared at the picture. Celine, sitting on the library floor, a child asleep in her lap, her smile soft and radiant. His fingers shook. He bought every copy they had and took them back to the estate. He locked himself in his study, unfolding the pages with the desperation of someone trying to hold on to a dream. He read every word about her childhood in shelters, her journey through pain, and her new purpose. And then, for the first time, he cried. It wasn't guilt that moved him, but awe. She hadn't just survived without him. She had become more than he ever imagined. She had blossomed. Later that evening, his grandfather entered the study. "I read it too," the old man said, holding something in his hand. Daniel looked up, eyes still red. "She left us behind," his grandfather added, placing a pale blue scarf, Celine's scarf, on the desk. She used to wrap it around her hands when she was nervous. Daniel reached out, touching it as if it were something sacred. "Do you know what I saw in her?" the old man asked softly. "Not pity, not charity. I saw fire and warmth, someone who made this cold house feel alive again." Daniel didn't reply, only closed his fingers around the scarf. "You're letting fear rob you the best thing that ever happened to you," his grandfather whispered. "And if you keep doing that, she won't be the only one who lost something." The room fell silent again, but inside Daniel's chest, a decision had already begun to form, not out of regret, but out of love, out of the deep, irrevocable knowledge that what he let go was never beneath him. It was everything he never knew he needed. And now, he would do whatever it took to find her again. The university auditorium buzzed with laughter, camera shutters, and the rustle of gowns. Proud families filled the rows, clutching flowers and balloons, craning their necks to spot loved ones in the sea of graduates. Celine stood among them, wearing her cap and gown, her heart pounding with disbelief and pride. The announcer called her name, Celine Grace Whitman. She stepped forward, head high, smile trembling. Her eyes scanned the crowd automatically and stopped in the very last row. Standing still was Daniel. He wore no suit, just a simple shirt and dark jeans. But his eyes, they held everything. She nearly stumbled. Their eyes locked. He said nothing, made no gesture, but he stood there, solid and quiet, like an unspoken promise. After the ceremony, he was gone. A week passed. Celine resumed her work at the library. Every afternoon, she read stories to children, planned her next community class, edited the manuscript for her book. Yet Daniel's silent presence lingered like a question she could not answer. Then, one rainy Thursday, he came. The door creaked softly. She looked up from the children's desk, and there he was, soaked from the drizzle, holding her scarf. Her breath caught. "I'm sorry for coming unannounced," he said quietly. "I didn't know if I'd even get the chance to speak to you." The room was empty, save for them. The storm outside muffled the world. Celine stood slowly. Her heart raced, but her voice was calm. "You found me." Daniel nodded. "I read your story. I read everything. I watched from the back during your graduation. I didn't want to ruin your day. Celine swallowed hard. Why are you here? I'm not here to justify what I did, he said. You deserved honesty, and I gave you fear. I let the world decide for me who I could love, and in doing so, I lost you. He stepped closer, but didn't reach for her. I wanted to be brave for you, but I was a coward. I let people who never knew your heart judge you, and I didn't fight hard enough. But I never stopped loving you. Celine's voice was barely above a whisper. Then why didn't you say something? Because I thought I had no right, he admitted. But I'm here now, not to ask for your love, just for a chance to be near you again. However, you'll allow me. Then he did something Celine never expected. Daniel dropped to his knees, not in a proposal, but in surrender. I'm not asking for forever, he said, his voice breaking. I'm just asking for a beginning, a chance to earn back your trust, to be a part of your life in whatever way you'll allow, whether as a friend, a supporter, or someone who quietly waits nearby. Celine's hand shook. I don't care what the world thinks anymore, he continued. I don't care if I run another company or plant trees for the rest of my life, as long as you remember I was the one you forgave. Tears streamed down her cheeks. She knelt in front of him, and without a word, she wrapped her arms around him. Daniel buried his face in her shoulder, holding on to her like a man who had wandered through deserts and finally found water. I'm still angry, she whispered. I know, he murmured. I'm still hurt. You deserve that, he replied. But I never stopped missing you, she said, even when I hated that I did. They sat on the library floor, wrapped in each other. The rain softly tapped on the windows. The books stood silently on their shelves, and the clock seemed to slow down, giving them space to breathe, to forgive, and to begin again. And somewhere inside them, something broken mended, not perfectly, but truthfully, because love, when returned, is not always grand. Sometimes it kneels, waits, and hopes to be forgiven. The sun filtered gently through the canopy of leaves that shaded the backyard of the Restart Library. Twinkling fairy lights hung between trees, and tables were set with wildflowers picked by neighborhood children. There were no luxury chairs, no grand aisle, just benches, laughter, and the scent of homemade pies cooling on nearby windowsills. A year had passed since Celine and Daniel found their way back to each other. Since then, Daniel had made a choice that stunned the business world. He stepped away from boardrooms and headlines, quietly becoming co-director of the community library they had built together. No more tailored suits or power lunches. His new days were filled with mending shelves, organizing book drives, and teaching jobless veterans how to code. Celine, radiant with newfound confidence, had become a beacon in the neighborhood. Her book, The Day I Took the Wrong Train But Found the Right Life, had quietly climbed the bestseller lists. But more importantly, it had changed lives. Letters poured in daily. Women who left shelters. Teens who dared apply for college. Lonely people who believed in hope again because of her words. And now, today was their wedding. The guests were people often forgotten. Street musicians, librarians, old ladies from the corner store, kids who once stole to eat but now read at night. There was no press, no fashion magazines, just real people with real stories, all bound by the quiet magic Celine and Daniel had brought into their lives. Celine wore a simple white dress that fluttered in the breeze. Her hair was adorned with tiny daisies picked that morning by a little girl named Lily. Daniel stood waiting under a wooden arch they'd built together from discarded planks and painted with local kids. He looked no different than any man in love, except his smile held the weight of every deeder they had survived. The ceremony was short, honest. When they exchanged vows, neither tried to be poetic. They just promised to stay, to not run when things got tough, to fight fair and forgive, often to love with their eyes open. When the officiant said, "You may kiss the bride," cheers erupted louder than any orchestra. Afterward, as cake was served and children danced barefoot on the grass, a small voice tugged at Celine's dress. It was Ava, a little girl Celine had taught to read the year before. She had been abandoned at a train station and taken in by a foster home nearby. Ava clutched a hand-drawn card and looked up at Celine, her big eyes filled with emotion. "Miss Celine," she said, her voice trembling, "you're not a princess." Everyone nearby paused, unsure what the child meant. "No, I'm not," Celine said. "But you're my miracle. Because now I don't have nightmares anymore. Because now I know there's kindness in the world." Daniel watched, swallowing hard. Celine hugged the little girl tightly. "You are the miracle, Ava. You." And there it was, the sixth crescendo, not in drama or flash, but in truth, in a quiet revelation that love, when lived, becomes a shelter, that healing, when shared, multiplies. Later that night, as the stars came out and the music softened, Daniel and Celine sat on the library steps, watching their chosen family laugh and dance under the fairy lights. "We'll never be perfect," Celine said, her head resting on his shoulder. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "But we're real, and that's enough," she whispered. Behind them, the library sign glowed softly. The Restart Library, a place to begin again. And beneath that light, two people once lost sat side by side, not as saviors, not as survivors, but as partners in a life rebuilt from broken pieces, glued together by choice, kindness, and love. And the world, for that moment, felt just right. Thank you for staying with us through this journey of pain, courage, and healing. Celine's story began with a wrong train and a heart burdened with struggle, but in the most unexpected place. She found not only kindness, but a new path, a new family, and a love that never judged her past. Her story reminds us that even when we feel lost, we might just be one step away from everything we've ever needed. If this story touched your soul, if it reminded you that every broken piece can still become part of something beautiful, please share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to Echoes of Resilience and click the bell icon, so you never miss a story that could heal your heart and inspire your journey, or remind you that love still lives in the quietest places. Until next time, keep believing in second chances. Sa.